We've all struggled with a right and wrong at some point in our lives. The moral dilemma between choosing good or evil is a key component of Infamous Second Son. On its surface, Infamous Second Son is a game about a powered up individual who needs to take out the bad person. But once you peel back all the layers, there's a lot more to the game. So let's go over the highs and lows of Infamous Second Son and see where it should be in your backlog. Just like most games, the first thing you're going to notice is the visuals. Considering Infamous Second Son released in early 2014, about 6 months after the PS4 released, I think they managed to create a game that looks fantastic. Usually, the best looking games are towards the end of a console generation, as the developers are more accustomed to working on that particular system. But Sucker Punch managed to create a visually appealing game right from the start. The game has good character designs, even though they can blend into the shadows between buildings or get lost in the darkness of nightfall. But what they did right is the great lighting effects. This version of Seattle is extremely detailed, and the sunlight in the game really helps show off everything the city has to offer. As you get further into the game, neon signs are going to become more and more important. Something as simple as an open sign on a random door you can't even enter needs to be something that you can see, and they did a great job of making sure they were noticeable both during the day and nighttime. The rest of the game also looks great. From building designs, even though it's mostly just exteriors, to characters during cutscenes, I was pleasantly surprised just how good I thought everything looked. On occasion, a character's facial expression might not have been perfect, but in no way was it ever a distraction. Moving from visuals to audio, I think the sound design worked really well. I think every character had their own personality and no one sounded too generic. While sometimes the dialogue provided might seem generic, the actual delivery from the voice actors really worked for me, especially during the cutscenes. There is dialogue during gameplay as well, which didn't have as much personality as the cutscenes, but even that dialogue worked for me. Aside from the characters, the actual sound design was pretty good. From weapons used by the enemies and your superpowers to the rattle of a spray can through the speaker of the controller, it all sounded really good. However, the music in the game never really felt too spectacular, and oftentimes felt a little generic to me. But it was always used in a good fashion where it would ramp up during major events or during intense combat. I don't think the music in the game was anything memorable, but it definitely didn't take away anything from the game. The writing in the game was pretty good. The vast majority of the story was given to the player through dialogue, and it is a decently interesting story. It deals with people being considered villains or heroes depending on perspective. It deals with who should or shouldn't be given second chances, and the main theme running through the game deals with karma. Deciding to show mercy or not actually leaves an impact on the story. Now, I'm not going to explain the story so that you can experience it for yourself if you desire, but the choices you make during the game can actually make a difference. From getting different cutscenes to having different upgrades for your abilities, I do think if you enjoy the game the first time through, it's worth running through it a second time to see the other side of the coin. But good visuals, good voice acting, and being given the opportunity to actually make decisions won't matter if the gameplay sucks, and there's some definite highs and lows all throughout the game. I'm someone who actually hasn't played any other Infamous game, so I had no frame of reference as to the style of game I'd be playing, and it actually has a ton of similarities to Spider-Man on the PS4. While they're not straight copies of each other, the amount of similarities was rather surprising. Both games use buildings as a good method of traveling a major city. Each character has a forward dash to help speed across rooftops, and each city was sectioned off into districts, each with their own set of missions and collectibles. In Spider-Man, you need to collect backpacks scattered around town, and in Infamous, you need to spray paint graffiti all throughout the city. Now, I actually don't mind this. I played Spider-Man before Infamous, and seeing as how I really enjoyed that style of game, I had no issues here. But if the Spider-Man format was something you didn't enjoy, then just be warned that it's extremely similar here. But while the design in that sense is similar, they're not entirely the same. First off, the combat. The combat is fairly fast paced. I found myself using the long range combat about 95% of the time, and almost never using the close range melee combat. I felt like the close range combat was too unreliable, and when it did hit, it wasn't very satisfying to use. I never felt like I was doing any serious damage to the enemy, even if I was, whereas the long range combat had a very satisfying sound when the enemy was hit, and I could tell it would make the enemy stumble, which kept them open for more attacks. However, fighting this way meant I was consistently looking to refill my energy, and during some of the longer fights, it just became a non-stop search for smoking cars or something else that I could use. The player also has the ability to completely change their weapon. As you progress through the game, you gain the ability to absorb neon and unleash it as a light-sourced weapon, as well as video. This one is a little bit more difficult to explain. While the basics of the energy is the same, the source comes from video screens you find throughout the city. But as the game went on, I found myself going back to the original power, as smoke just worked the way I preferred. The movement in the game worked fairly well. Being able to climb most objects and buildings, as well as dash throughout the city, allows you to explore basically anywhere you desire, as long as it's outside. The movement is fast-paced, different for whatever energy you have absorbed at that moment, and for the most part, they're all easy to control. The game also uses the controller in an interesting way. While the vast majority of the game it plays as a standard game, there are moments where you need to spray paint graffiti to a wall and you actually use gyro controls to do it. Needing to turn the controller sideways and shaking it as if you're shaking a can is an interesting decision, and one that, while it worked perfectly fine, it felt like it was added in solely to say that they used the feature. I understand that as an early game in the console's lifecycle, they probably wanted to do something to help make the game stand out, and while it was different than most games, it wasn't anything groundbreaking and didn't really leave a lasting impression that it's a good feature. But even with all these good ideas, the game isn't perfect. As I progressed through the game and more enemies were attacking me at one time, I started to notice the game struggle more and more. The further along into the game I got, the more times I would notice losing frames. Now, it was never too bad where I felt like it was a major issue, but it was definitely something that I would notice. I also had one major glitch that I found, and while it wasn't game breaking, it was definitely surprising. I found what I assumed was supposed to be a streetlight, but it either didn't load in or it was supposed to be removed, but they just turned it invisible instead and hoped that no one would find it. This glitch had no effect on my actual experience. It wasn't a bug that crashed the game or anything like that, but it was extremely weird to find myself climbing a streetlight that just didn't exist. Aside from those styles of issues, my biggest complaint about the game is the enemy spawns. Way too often, enemies would just spawn directly behind me. I can enter an area, pass over a rooftop, land on the neighboring roof, then be shot in the back by enemies who just appeared off screen on the rooftop I passed just 5 seconds earlier. During my first playthrough on normal difficulty, this was annoying but not frustrating. I'm currently in the middle of my expert playthrough to get all the trophies, and this is becoming extremely frustrating. Basically, every fight, enemies will spawn behind me even from the direction that I arrived. Even though I haven't tried it, it's a similar issue as to what I heard about the enemy spawns in Cyberpunk. It's extremely frustrating to know that there's no enemies behind me. I look over a ledge and instantly get shot in the back, which then alerts all the enemies I'm trying to scout. It actually changes the way I'm playing my expert playthrough, as it's forcing me to play a more run and gun style, as any slow methodical stealth I try to do just leads to enemies spawning behind me. Aside from that, the other major issue that I have, especially with expert mode, is that this is now my second playthrough. I would like the ability to skip through the cutscenes. For whatever reason, the game doesn't allow any cutscene to be skipped, and I don't know why. Granted, none of them are very long, but I still would appreciate the ability to skip them if I wish. Other than those two gameplay issues, I didn't find too much wrong with the game, although it's not the amount of issues, it's how they affect your experience. And both of those issues are things that personally bother me quite a lot. On the plus side, they didn't really bother me too much on my normal playthrough, as they didn't need to add any extra enemies to make it more difficult, and I wanted to watch all the cutscenes my first time through, so as a one-time play, there's quite a lot less to worry about. But the game actually does a decent job of making you want to do a second playthrough. Seeing that I had actual decisions to make throughout the game instantly made me want to see what would happen if I chose the other option. Would it be the same with one line of dialogue changed, or would it be something totally different that changes the experience? I played through my first time choosing everything I could in order to achieve good karma, and it forced me to play a certain way, subduing enemies instead of completely taking them out, whereas I'm now in the middle of my evil playthrough and it allows me to just obliterate enemies and civilians if I so choose. The game is varied enough that I do think it justifies the second playthrough. as long as you enjoyed the game the first time through. If you're a trophy hunter, which usually I'm not, playing through a second time will be something you have to do, but I think they did a good job with making the trophies extremely achievable. I 100%ed my first playthrough, and I ended up only missing the trophies that relied upon me being evil. Once you've played the game both ways, I think the game doesn't have much of a reason to go back though. I don't see myself playing this again for quite a while once I finish my expert run. But with all those highs and lows, the real question is, where should Infamous Second Son be in your backlog? Personally, I enjoy the game, but I don't think it's anything anyone should rush out to play. I think it should be in the middle of your backlog. If you're intrigued by this style of game, where you need to clear districts, go to the missions when you choose, and have random drug dealers on the streets to beat up whenever you want, I would recommend Spider-Man first. It has less issues and more interesting combat. But if you don't like Spider-Man as a character, but you're intrigued by that style of game, then by all means, play Infamous Second Son. There's nothing inherently wrong with the game, but there's very little separating it from the pack. Although I should mention that as someone who hasn't played any other Infamous game, I felt right at home. I didn't feel like I missed anything, and if you're worried you need to play the other games first, it's possible it'll help, but I felt like there was no issue with me skipping the other games, and I was able to enjoy this game for what it is. And if you're curious where another game should be in your backlog, something like Metroid Prime, then be sure to check out this video right here.